What are biogenic emissions and why are they controversial? Biogenic emissions are greenhouse gas emissions that result from burning biomass based fuel, such as bioethanol or wood pellets. Currently, these emissions are treated as carbon neutral as a matter of policy. So, what does carbon neutral mean? Well, carbon neutrality is a hypothesis that suggests that the emissions from bioenergy should not be counted towards the final or net carbon footprint of a product or process. The rationale for treating emissions from biomass as carbon neutral is that these emissions represent atmospheric carbon that was absorbed by plant life while it was living, and once it's released into the atmosphere, it will be reabsorbed by new growth again. But for a number of reasons, this hypothesis has been vigorously challenged, and a growing consensus is emerging that biogenic emissions are simply not carbon neutral as was once assumed. Some of the first objections to the concept of carbon neutrality related to growing edible crops for fuel. It was argued that this involved sacrificing agricultural land that otherwise would be used to grow food. A related concern was that natural old growth forests were being threatened by incentives to convert forest land to commercial plantations, thereby decimating these rich sources of carbon and destroying vital ecosystems. More recently, research on the impacts of biogenic emissions has more accurately accounted for carbon losses associated with the harvesting and processing of biomass energy. Notwithstanding the most current research on biogenic emissions, many industries still burn considerable amounts of biomass for energy on the outdated premise that biogenic emissions are carbon neutral. The forest products industry uses wood-based bioenergy during the harvesting of timber and the manufacture of wood-based building products. The burning of wood-based biofuels, such as wood pellets, also benefits from carbon neutrality accounting and is frequently touted as environmentally sound and secure. In reality, wood-based bioenergy emits more carbon dioxide per unit of energy produced than any conventional fossil fuel. But by treating these emissions as 100% carbon neutral, we risk increasing actual emissions to the atmosphere. A second concern with wood-based bioenergy is that even though some of these emissions will be reabsorbed by new growth, there's no guarantee that they will ever be fully reabsorbed. For instance, if whole trees are harvested for pulpwood used to manufacture fuel, or if old growth forests are harvested with much of the timber used for fuel, we are incurring a carbon debt to our natural ecosystems that we will never be able to repay. Third, unlike agricultural crops, such as sugarcane or corn that are grown for fuel production, trees take a comparatively long time to regrow, at a minimum 25 or 30 years. This time lag between emissions release and reabsorption can be decades long, and during the interim, these emissions are having an impact on our climate equal to emissions from fossil fuels. In the atmosphere, carbon is carbon. There is no real distinction made between biogenic and fossil fuel emissions. They have identical greenhouse effects. The disconnect is between current carbon accounting practices that treat biogenic emissions as carbon neutral and cutting-edge research which shows that this is not the case. Life cycle assessments and environmental product declarations for wood-based building products do not account for biogenic emissions in a realistic manner. This leads to distorted policy and procurement decisions and negates our efforts to minimize the carbon footprint of the built environment. For more information, please visit www.buildingresiliencecoalition.org.